Now, what I am going to talk about is the systems without CO2 absorption, its design and function. Is it essential that you should know about the design and then about the function? You might think these systems we are not using these days, why should we know about it? But unless you know the why we have gone out of this and why we used it extensively at that time, it will not make sense what we are doing now. Now, if you first episode of administration of anesthesia, it is by Morton, and what did he use? He used this, and this is the first breathing system that came inside. What did he do? He had a sponge. He had a one glass bowl in which you had two openings, one here and one here. Patient is asked to clench his teeth on top of this and breathe inside, so that the atmospheric air went through this, took up the vapor, and got into the atmosphere. When he breathes out, he came out through this and went into the atmosphere through this. Even though some of it might go by the side. But the idea is not to allow the atmospheric air to go by the side, but to go through this. So this is the first thing that came inside to say that we have a breathing system. Now, John Snow in 1851, he recognized that when you are breathing in and out, and if the capacity is large, then the carbon dioxide will be rebreathed, and it is not good for the patient. So he put caustic potash into this. So, and caustic potash will absorb the carbon dioxide. So even if the patient is rebreathing through this, so this is a big one, and this is the mask in which the patient is to inhale. Atmospheric air will go through this, go through the ether that is there and come out, and the patient will get ether. Okay, the patient will get anesthetized, and the patient breathes out. It goes through the same thing back into the chamber. Carbon dioxide is absorbed, and remaining gases can be rebreathed safely without any harm. Now, different models came because that time whatever we are using is only ether and the chloroform. That's how these things developed. And this is Clover's apparatus where he gave an oxygen and the ether. So the atmospheric air will be drawn through this and then go through the inner tube. And he put a reservoir in between so that the oxygen is there in that reservoir and it can be taken up by the patient when along with the air that is going inside. There is a small hole there. So through that the oxygen also will get inside. So there is an enrichment of the inspired mixture more than the atmospheric air. And here we have the Junkers bottle. You see this mask, it has got two valves and it has got two bulbs. We will discuss about it little later in detail, why the two bulbs and the two valves there. And this is first semblance of a unidirectional valve. So he allowed the air to go inside, and then whatever the patient is breathing out will go out through this valve. It will come in through this and go out through this. So he established a unidirectional flow so that the patient does not breathe whatever he is breathing out. That is the idea. And here you had a bulb, so that you squeeze the bulb for the air to go inside and go onto the patient's face. So when you press this, it will be a blast. So you had a reservoir here that will expand and then collapse slowly, allowing the continuous flow of air through this. Right. When you squeeze here, it will be an intermittent flow, but because you have put in a reservoir here, that will expand and then it will collapse slowly. So that will give a continuous flow of air into this apparatus, and the flow onto the patient's face will be continuous and not intermittent blasts with the anesthetic. Okay, that is how these things were designed. Then we had the first Boyle's apparatus. Boyle's apparatus, you had the gas and oxygen, and then two bottles, one with the ether, the one with chloroform. And you had a bag, and then you have unidirectional valve, and then you had a mask. So the gas flows through this, gets into this reservoir, the patient breathes from this and out into the atmosphere. Okay, that is how in 1917 this apparatus is designed. Circle breathing system in 1906, this is Franz Kohn who designed this. he had the soda line, and then the gas is passed through that, and then there is a one-way valve through which the patient was breathing. Well, this is how he designed. But the problem is the tubings are so small, the patients were not able to breathe through this tubing, and so this did not come into the clinical practice at all. And this is by Waters. This is a to and fro system that Dr. Charulata will be talking a little more detail. Then in 1921, McGill designed this system, which is famously known as McGill system, where you had a reservoir bag and then the other components were connecting it to the patient. Okay, then we had, during the World War II, we had this is called a flax can. It is used by the American Army extensively. This is the can of ether with one cork on top. All that they have to do is take off that cork and put in a tube and connect this, and there will be another opening here that you open it out, so the patient will breathe through this and then take the ether along and continue to breathe and get anesthetized. That is how it is designed to give an adaptation to the field where you do not have equipments, you do not have to use anything. You just open the can, put the tube inside and put this airway into the patient's mouth and tell them to breathe, and they will get anesthetized. Whatever surgery to be done, they will do intermittently. They will disconnect and connect it back so that the patient doesn't become deep. Then came we have this ISTPs in 1937. This is designed for using it in the pediatric patients. It's a small 5 mm tube, 10 mm tube, and with a 5 mm input for the fresh gas flows. So the patient will breathe in and out, and you give a fresh gas flow which is equivalent to whatever is the peak inspiratory flow of the patient. And we had all this wire meshes on which you put a 6 layer of gauze and start pouring ether. Patient will breathe from the atmosphere through the mask, and then they will get anesthetized. So intermittently you top it up so that to maintain the level of anesthesia, you take it out, patient breathes to the atmosphere and then comes out of anesthesia. That is how till 1950s, this is how things were going on. And the first attempt was made to classify these breathing systems in 1951. How did they classify? Depending on the amount of rebreathing that is there. If there is no rebreathing, they called it an open system. If there is a partial rebreathing, they called it semi-closed. And then if there is a total rebreathing, they called it a closed system. That is how it is classified. Okay, example, open ether will come here as an open system. Semi-closed will be your McGill circuit, and then the closed will be the circle system. That is how they put it up. Again, Drips in 1952, he reclassified it to saying that taking into account the presence or absence of a reservoir, rebreathing, carbon dioxide absorption, and directional valves. So he put them as insufflation, open, semi-closed, and closed. And this classification was followed for a long time, but main problem, it's not just these two, there are so many classifications of breathing system that have been published, mainly because there is no clarity about what you mean by a breathing system. How do you define a breathing system? If that definition is there, then because insufflation is not a breathing system, what do you mean by an insufflation? You just insufflate, you put a gag, and then like the flax can that you had where patient was breathing, but if you insufflate oxygen or anesthetic through that airway, then the patient gets anesthetized. There is nothing, no system that is involved. You are just blowing the amount of anesthetic into the pharynx of the patient, and the patient breathes and gets anesthetized. So there is nothing like a breathing system involved. So first thing is to define what is a breathing system. So I had defined a breathing system like this. Nobody, I have put it up, but I don't think anybody has adopted this as a definition, but this is my definition of a breathing system, and everything will fall in place if you take this definition into account. That is, breathing system is defined as assembly of components, and which connects the patient's airway to the anesthetic machine, creating an artificial atmosphere from and into which the patient breathes. You understand, you have an anesthesia machine, you have the patient, you need an interface between the two, and so you assemble certain components into that, and create an artificial atmosphere into which the patient is breathing, and that is what we call as a breathing system. If you go on Google breathing system, nothing will come out. They will all talk about respiratory system, physiology of respiratory system, because the word system was not accepted at that time. And all the time they will be referring it to as a circuit, breathing circuit. That is how it has been referred. But it cannot be considered as a circuit because there is nothing as a circuit, it is assembly of components. So, and Conway in 1985, he put, no, we should be addressing it as a system. So now I think it has been accepted. Still, the Google doesn't give you as a breathing system. Miller started using it in the textbook, and a few others are using it as a system. So all the papers published after that in 1990s, 91, then they also use it as a system. So after 20 years, it is getting accepted as a terminology that is to be used, so that you call it a system. What are the components? I said it's an assembly of components. What are the essential components that you need for the breathing system? One is you must have entry for the fresh gas to flow inside. You have a machine, from the machine the gas has to flow into the system. So you should have an entry port. That is the first thing that you should have. So commonly you have this kind of entry ports. Either it comes in from behind or it is connected to the near the patient. Now you should have a reservoir bag in the form of a bag, so that because whatever we are giving from the machine is continuous, but what you are breathing is intermittent. So when you are breathing out, whatever gas that is flowing out from the machine should be accommodated somewhere. So you need a reservoir. And then when you breathe in, machine cannot give you all the gases that you need. So you need a reservoir from which you can breathe inside. So that is the second requirement. So you have a reservoir of gas in the form of a bag. Then there should be a port connected to the patient's airway. So you should be able to connect it to the endotracheal tube or to the mask or anything. That should be the port, and that's what it is. And so it can be connected to the endotracheal tube or to the mask, which can be applied onto the patient. Then there should be an expiratory port or a valve, because whatever the patient breathes out, it has to go into the atmosphere. So you must have a valve which allows it to go into the atmosphere. Okay, then you have an interconnecting corrugated tube, so that you have a capacity and you have a flexibility of using it anywhere you want. So that is how breathing system components are assembled together to form a breathing system. This is one form of a breathing system, which is commonly referred to as a Meigels circuit. Okay, you have the other one, the same assembly of components, you do it the other way. The fresh gas is coming here, you have a corrugated tube, this valve is at the back, and then you have a reservoir bag, and this is called Mapleson D. This is a different type of a breathing system. Now, you take off that valve and put in a non-rebreathing valve, then it becomes a non-rebreathing system. Okay, so these are the examples, assembly of components, how we assemble them, and then when you assemble them differently, you should know how they function. That is why it is important that you know about the functional analysis. And if the carbon dioxide absorber is must if a total rebreathing is to be allowed. So you put an absorber in between, so the CO2 is absorbed and the patient rebreathes whatever the exhaled gases for economy of gases. Flow directional valves may or may not be used. You find if it's a circle system, you have the flow directional valves. When it's a to and fro system, you don't have any valves controlling. It is the patient who controls the flow on either direction. So, 1985, Conway classified the breathing systems. Because it was so confusing, he said, no, we should be using a very simple classification, but it should give the maximum information. That's why he classified it as breathing system with carbon dioxide absorption and breathing system without carbon dioxide absorption. That's the broad classification. So whatever we are using as a breathing system should fall into any one of them. So what is this? And it is subclassified in 1988 by Miller when he introduced a new breathing system inside. Okay, that's why he did a reclassification to give you a little more clarity about what you are using. And this breathing system either could have a unidirectional flow or a bidirectional flow. The flow could be on one direction or it could be on either direction, both with absorber and also without absorber. So both of them can have either a unidirectional flow or a bidirectional flow. And so we'll just look into all this. So I am going to concentrate on breathing systems without CO2 absorption. You have both unidirectional and bidirectional flow in this. Unidirectional is a non-rebreathing system. That's what I said, you put a non-rebreathing valve at the end, then it becomes a non-rebreathing system. And you have a bidirectional flow, and this bidirectional flow has been further subclassified into these categories. One as an afferent reservoir system and an efferent reservoir system, and enclosed afferent reservoir system and combined systems. These are the further classification that has been given by Miller in 1988. Okay, let's look into all this. What are the essential requirements of a breathing system? First and foremost requirement is that deliver the gases from the machine to the alveoli in the same concentration as set in the shortest possible time. You set say 50% oxygen, 50% nitrous oxide. A patient should get same composition of 50% nitrous oxide and oxygen within a few breaths. If it is immediately in the next breath, it is fine. That is what, and you said 1% halothane or 2% sevoflurane. The patient should get that concentration immediately in the next breath. That is what is ideal, so that you know what you are delivering to the patient. That is the first requirement. Now, if you take the non-rebreathing systems, you find that fresh gas comes from here and you have a non-rebreathing valve here. The patient breathes from here and breathes out into the atmosphere. It goes out, it doesn't go back. So whatever you set in the machine here is delivered to the patient within 2 breaths. First and second breath, the patient gets the same concentration as what you have set. But what are the disadvantages of this particular system? But when you look at the bidirectional flow systems, we'll come to it a little later. You find it flows in both ways, but most of the time the patient gets, within a few breaths, the patient gets whatever has been set on the machine. Okay. Now, second requirement, effectively eliminate the carbon dioxide. Because you have created artificial atmosphere for the patient to breathe. That atmosphere should not contain carbon dioxide which the patient is going to rebreathe. So it should be eliminated from the system. That is the second requirement of a breathing system. So how do these systems eliminate? You look at the non-rebreathing system, when the patient breathes out, the entire gas goes out into the atmosphere. Does not rebreathe any of them. And because, have you used any of the non-rebreathing valves? You have any idea that you have used a non-rebreathing valve? In anything? Who's talking? Yeah. Ambu bag. Yeah. You are using an ambu bag and your self-inflating bag. You squeeze the bag, it opens the valve and goes to the patient. You leave the bag, the valve closes, the patient breathes out into the atmosphere. So that is a simple one that you know. And the same valve, if you take and put it into the anesthesia breathing system, it becomes a non-rebreathing system. Okay. So that's how it is. So when the patient breathes out, this valve closes and this valve opens, and whatever the patient is breathing out goes into the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide is eliminated satisfactorily. There is no problem whatsoever. So this is a very, very efficient system for eliminating carbon dioxide. But what are the disadvantages of the system? Main thing is fresh gas flow has to be constantly adjusted. If you are using a ambu bag, you squeeze and then it takes up air from the atmosphere and fills up the bag immediately. But if you are creating an artificial atmosphere and then you squeeze the bag and squeeze out 2 liters and you give a flow of 5 liters per minute, that bag will not fill up because you have emptied the whole thing. You will not, or if the patient takes a deep breath, two deep breaths and the bag gets emptied and there will be nothing to breathe from the bag. So that is one of the biggest disadvantages. And if the patient is hypoventilating, breathing less, and your flow is more, then what is possibility is that the valve will get stuck. This bag will become tense because the flow is more, and this pressure itself will close that other expiratory valve like this, and then the patient will not be able to breathe out. It will be stuck in a position where this bag is inflated, the patient's chest is inflated, and the patient will not be able to breathe out. So these kind of complications are likely with this if you are not careful. So you have to adjust the flow accordingly so that bag doesn't get too tense or it doesn't collapse totally. So that is a constant adjustment is needed for you to you have to monitor. Other two things we learned, then the not convenient as the bulk of the valve is positioned very near the patient. It is very near the airway, so it is a bulky valve and so it is inconvenient. Not only that, it can malfunction due to condensation of moisture in the valve. So if there is a moisture there, then the valve movement will be affected, it will get stuck and you might have a similar problem. So these are the problems with this. And then there is wastage of fresh gases because you have to give a flow which is equivalent to the alveolar ventilation of the patient so that all that gas goes out into the atmosphere. So there is a lot of wastage of the anesthetic gases. Okay, now the bidirectional systems. These are the Mapleson systems. You have heard of Mapleson? Yeah? Who is he? Is he an anesthesiologist? Any idea? He is not an anesthesiologist. He is a physicist. So he went and worked with Dr. Mushin in Cardiff, and he has been given a job to assemble the components differently. Whatever the component that we have talked about, you assemble them differently, analyze them and give me a report. That is what the job that is given to him way back in 1956. So he assembled these components that we talked about in different places, and then he analyzed, mathematically he analyzed to find out what should be the flow, what should be the for effective elimination of carbon dioxide. So he did a mathematical calculations. Terms have come into play as to be labeled as, and then each assembly he gave a label. He called one as A, other one B, C, D, E. So like that he put the label so that he can identify what kind of a combination that he is analyzing. That is how you got this Mapleson A, B, C, D, E system. This is a A configuration, and then you take off that and then you move that valve from the valve is here and then move the fresh gas entry to the front. Initially we had from behind, and then you have the corrugated tube and the reservoir bag. So it is reassembled like this, then it became a B. Then he took off that corrugated tube and put the bag into that place, and this became Mapleson C. Okay, he changed the valve to the bag and put a corrugated tube. So you had a fresh gas entry here, corrugated tube, valve and the bag, and that became Mapleson D. And then he took off this valve and the bag, and that became the Mapleson E. So these are the 5 systems he analyzed. He reassembled the components and then he analyzed the functional analysis of these components, of these systems. So when we said effectively eliminate the carbon dioxide, that is what we said is the requirement of a breathing system. Let's look at this. This assembly is Mapleson A. And this assembly is Mapleson D. Okay. So do they effectively eliminate carbon dioxide? I will go into a little more detail a little later. It is, yes, they do eliminate carbon dioxide effectively in this circuit when the patient is breathing spontaneously, and in this one, which is a Mapleson D, when the patient ventilation is being controlled. Okay. Now, what you have to remember is that all these systems depend on the fresh gas flow for effective elimination of carbon dioxide. You have to specify, function can be manipulated by changing the parameters like the fresh gas flow, and the alveolar ventilation apparatus dead space. These are the things that can control the elimination of carbon dioxide. It is totally dependent on the fresh gas flow and on the ventilation. How is it? If there is no fresh gas flow into the system, then what happens? Patient will get suffocated. There is no gas coming inside, you are just having a closed system in which you are trying to breathe. So the total place will be, patient will get suffocated, will not be able to breathe. If the fresh gas flow is low, system do not eliminate carbon dioxide because they will be breathing in and out into the system itself, and there is no way the gas can go out. And if there is an excess flow there is a wastage of gas. So anytime you talk about the systems, you have to specify the minimum fresh gas flow for efficient functioning of this particular system. So whenever you talk about this, what is the fresh gas flow that you need to give for an effective elimination of carbon dioxide satisfactory? That should be the accompanying statement along with the Mappleson's A, B, C, D and E for all this. If you don't specify that, then you have not clarifying anything. I just want you to understand this. What is the normal production of carbon dioxide in the body? How much carbon dioxide is produced by a 70 kg man? How much is it? Yeah, I put it up, you can read. 200 ml. 200 ml. Fine. What is the oxygen uptake? Which I have not put. 250 ml. Okay. What's the respiratory quotient? 0.8. So 250 taken up, 200 coming out. So you have 0.8. Now, this 200 ml is eliminated as a 5% carbon dioxide in the end tidal gas. When you are breathing out, what is the percentage of carbon dioxide in the expired gas? You say, what is the end tidal CO2? You always refer to in millimeters of mercury. How much is it? What is the end tidal CO2? Normal? 25 to 35. Anybody else? 25 to 45. 25 to 35. What is the arterial PaCO2? What's the normal PaCO2? Arterial carbon dioxide, how much is it? 35 to 45. Okay, take an average mid, so it is 40. Okay, now if you say this is 25 to 35, why there is so much of difference between the two? Are we telling something wrong? When you say arterial is 40 and that should be going out through the lung, and you are saying normal value is 25 to 35, is that right? Maybe that is what normally you are seeing in your monitors, but that is not right. When you are seeing that value of 25 and 30 and all, you are not doing something right. You are doing something wrong. Okay, now if you take an average of 37.5, if you convert it into percentage, then it will be 5%. So you are breathing out. You can also put in your monitor, convert that the thing into to show you as a percentage. It will show you as a percentage. Your monitor will show you as a kilopascals or a millimeter or as a percentage. You can have a look at it, change that and have a look at it. And we are eliminating it as a 5% gas mixture. So if 200 ml of gas has to go out as a 5% mixture, how much should be the total ventilation? If this elimination of 200 ml carbon dioxide as a 5% mixture, the alveolar ventilation has to be 4 liters. How did you do that? Yeah, you are right. Yeah, 100%. So you 200 into 100 by 5. So you need to have a minimum of 4 liters of alveolar ventilation for eliminating this carbon dioxide satisfactorily. So you get to a figure, for an adult at least, to say that if your alveolar ventilation is less than 4 liters per minute, you will end up with a hypercarbia. If it is more than 4 liters per minute, you will end up with a hypocarbia. You understand? Why these things happen? When a patient in diabetic ketoacidosis hyperventilates, what do you have? Hypocarbia. Because he is hyperventilating, his alveolar ventilation is much high, carbon dioxide is washed out, and so you will end up with the hypocarbia. Same way if the patient has been sedated with morphine and then hypoventilating, sedated, and then what happens? Patient lands up with hypercarbia. So it is dependent on the alveolar ventilation because the amount of carbon dioxide produced is constant, almost constant, I won't say absolutely. So if ventilation makes a change, same way, if the alveolar ventilation, if you are ventilating the patient with 5 liters and it contains 1% carbon dioxide, or if you are ventilating with 8 liters per minute and it contains 2.5% of carbon dioxide, the patient will maintain normocarbia. Why? Because you are supplying here 200 ml of carbon dioxide and you are taking out 200 ml of carbon dioxide. So finally, the 200 ml gets eliminated by this 8 liters ventilation. Here you are supplying about 50 ml of carbon dioxide, but you are taking out 250 ml totally. So it's still, so that 200 ml of carbon dioxide will satisfactorily be eliminated in spite of having an amount of rebreathing that you allow. You understand this? This is a concept that you will have to understand. In spite of allowing a carbon dioxide rebreathing, you can still eliminate carbon dioxide by controlling the ventilation. Understood? Okay. Now, subclassification of bidirectional flow. So it is effluent reservoir, enclosed effluent reservoir system, and combined systems. Okay, you just understand what is these terminologies mean. What is an effluent reservoir? The limb that connects the breathing system, which delivers the fresh gas from the patient, from the machine to the patient, is called the effluent limb. You look at your nervous system. You have a stimulus, it goes to the spinal cord, it ascends up, and then there's a reaction, it comes back. You call this system, which takes the impulses into the patient, into the spinal cord, as an effluent impulse, and then processing, and then it comes out, and that is an effluent impulse. So if you have that concept clear, you will have this concept also clear. Whatever limb that is taking the gases from the machine to the patient is called an effluent limb. Whatever is the limb that is taking the gases from the patient back into the machine is called an effluent limb. Any doubt in this? Okay, no doubt in that. So if the reservoir is placed in the limb, if the reservoir is placed in the limb where the gases are going to the patient, then it is called effluent reservoir system. And if the reservoir is placed in the effluent limb, then it is called effluent reservoir system. Okay, the position of the reservoir either in the effluent limb or in the effluent limb, so you classify them as effluent reservoir system and effluent reservoir system. Okay. Mapleson A, B, C, these systems, they have the reservoir in the effluent system because the fresh gas is delivered here and this is part of the fresh gas system. So in A, B, C, here it is coming from behind, but here it is coming in front, but these are all in that part of the fresh gas delivery. So all of them, they're called effluent reservoir. And another system that you have is a coaxial system which is called LAX. You have a effluent limb placed inside the effluent limb, but the reservoir is in the effluent limb itself. So these are classified as effluent reservoir system. And these effluent reservoir systems, most important thing in functional analysis you have to know, They work efficiently during spontaneous breathing provided the expiratory valve is separated from the reservoir bag and the fresh gas flow of at least one tidal volume of the patient. Okay, they function satisfactorily if these are separated by one tidal volume of the patient and the fresh gas flow is at least equivalent to one tidal volume. I mean, no, sorry. Reservoir bag and the fresh gas flow. Okay, it is separated from the port where the gas is delivered. If it is separated from that port and the reservoir bag by one tidal volume, then they function satisfactorily for spontaneous ventilation. Okay. If the fresh gas flow is close to the patient and it is not separated from the expiratory valve, then they are inefficient, both during spontaneous as well as controlled. Why this amount of separation is needed, when we come to the functional analysis, we will know that. Okay, that is what is needed. If it is very close to the expiratory valve, they do not function satisfactorily, even during spontaneous or controlled.